The marble of the Palatine is never truly silent. It breathes with the echoes of 1,000 conspiracies. But tonight the silence was different. It was heavy, a suffocating velvet wrap that tasted of copper and a strange, biting ozone. I am Kiso Varus, a man who has spent more time in the mud of the Danubius than in the halls of power, yet here I stood, a centurion of the guard, guarding a threshold that felt increasingly like the mouth of Sharon. My boots, iron-studded and heavy, made a hollow clack-clack-clack against the polished floor as I walked the corridor leading to the Emperor's private chambers. I stopped. The 2 Praetorians at the door didn't move. They stood like statues of Mars, their scuta held with a rigidity that felt wrong. Roman soldiers are disciplined, yes, but they breathe. They shift. They smell of sweat, oil, and the sour wine of the barracks. These men smelled of nothing. They were sterile like sun-bleached bone. "Stand aside, Quintus," I said, addressing the man on the left. He didn't blink. His eyes, fixed forward, seemed to vibrate in their sockets. I reached out a hand to his shoulder, and the world shattered. My fingers didn't hit wool and leather. They hit a surface as cold and hard as a winter lake. Quintus's face didn't move, but the skin beneath his eyes began to ripple, a sickening, fluid motion like worms beneath a silk sheet. Then he screamed. It wasn't a human sound, it was a burst of high-frequency static that shattered the nearby ceramic vases. In a heartbeat, the Praetorian unmade itself. The leather straps of his larica segmentata snapped as 4 obsidian, insectoid limbs erupted from his ribs. His face split down the middle, the human skin peeling back to reveal a cluster of spinning, lidless red sensors. He didn't pull a sword, he swung a limb tipped with a vibrating violet blade of pure energy. I dived. The violet blade hissed over my head, vaporizing a lock of my hair and carving a deep, glowing molten scar into the marble pillar behind me. I rolled, my hand finding the hilt of my gladius, a blade I'd had reinforced with a sliver of star metal recovered from the Carthage ruins. Infiltrators. I roared, but the palace remained silent. The betrayal was deeper than the door. I came up from the roll and drove my blade into the creature's lower abdomen. The star metal hissed as it met the alien exoskeleton. A fountain of sapphire fluid drenched my arm, stinging like a swarm of hornets. The creature gurgled, a mechanical, wet sound, and I twisted the steel, feeling the internal machinery grind and break. It collapsed into a heap of twitching obsidian and ruined Roman wool. The second guard was already on me. His face was a half-melted mask of humanity, one eye still Roman, the other a glowing red orb. He lunged with a concealed plasma dagger. I caught his wrist, the heat of the weapon blistering my skin instantly. We wrestled in the shadows of the great hall, my muscles straining against a strength that was tectonic. I slammed my forehead into its face, feeling the crunch of bone and the shatter of glass. As it staggered, I kicked its knee, shattering the hydraulic joint, and followed with a decapitating strike. The head, a mix of skull and circuitry, bounced across the mosaic floor. I didn't stop to breathe. I ran toward the Emperor's quarters. The palace was no longer a home for a god-king, it was a hive. From the shadows of every alcove, more Praetorians emerged. Some were fully transformed, obsidian horrors with 6 limbs and humming energy staves. Others were half-mimics, their human forms glitching in and out of reality as they struggled to maintain the deception in the heat of combat. I reached the great gallery. It was a slaughterhouse. The real Praetorians, the few who hadn't been replaced, were being butchered. I saw Decimus, a veteran of 20 years, pinned against the statue of Minerva by 3 mimics. They weren't just killing him, they were processing him, small metallic needles erupting from their fingertips to burrow into his skin. Rome does not fall. I lunged into the fray. I was a whirlwind of iron and star metal. My gladius was a streak of cold light in the violet gloom. I hacked through a mimic's primary limb, spun, and buried my blade in the central sensor of another. I wasn't fighting for an emperor, I was fighting for the sanity of the world. Each strike was a visceral explosion of blue ichor and white sparks. The floor became so slick with sapphire blood that I had to anchor my feet against the fallen statues to keep my balance. A cerebral inquisitor, a larger, more grotesque version of the mimics, dropped from the vaulted ceiling. It was 12 feet of spindly glass limbs and a pulsating, translucent brain sac. It let out a sonic pulse that threw me backward 20 feet. I hit a marble table, the wood and stone splintering beneath me. My vision swam. The Inquisitor moved toward me, its limbs clicking, a dozen needles poised to harvest my mind. I grabbed a heavy bronze tripod from the wreckage. As the creature lunged, I swung it with the desperate strength of the doomed. The bronze caught the Inquisitor in its brain sac. The sack didn't just break, it detonated. A spray of gray cerebral fluid and violet light blinded me for a second, but the creature was dead, its limbs folding like a broken chair. I wiped the fluid from my eyes and kept moving. My armor was a ruin, my left arm was charred from a plasma strike, and my lungs felt like they were filled with hot sand. I reached the Emperor's inner sanctum. The doors, made of solid cedar and gold, had been blown off their hinges. Inside, the Emperor wasn't on his throne. He was suspended in the center of the room by a web of pulsing, organic-looking wires that grew out of the walls. A Primarch Praetorian, the master of the infiltrators, stood before him. It looked almost perfectly human, wearing the ornate armor of the guard's commander, but its eyes were voids of absolute, swirling black. "Quiso Varus," it said, its voice a perfect, chilling imitation of my father. "Why struggle? The Empire is a rotting corpse. We are simply giving it a new skeleton." "My father died in the mud of the north," I rasped, my gladius trembling in my grip. "You're just a parasite in a dead man's suit." The Primarch smiled. It was a terrifying, toothy thing. It didn't pull a weapon, it raised its hand and the very air in the room began to vibrate. I felt my heart skip a beat, my blood boiling in my veins. It was a gravity well concentrated on my chest. I couldn't breathe. I fell to one knee, the gladius clattering to the floor. The Primarch walked toward me, its movements elegant and slow. "You have a strong spark, Centurion. You will make an excellent template for the next legion." As it reached for my throat, I didn't go for my sword. I went for my belt. I pulled out a fire pot, a ceramic flask of Syrian naphtha modified with a shard of a captured alien power cell. I didn't throw it. I slammed it into the floor between us. The explosion was a roar of orange flame and blue lightning. The gravity well shattered. The Primarch was thrown back, its human skin burning away to reveal the charred obsidian skeleton beneath. I lunged through the fire, my hand finding my gladius in the smoke. I didn't aim for the chest. I aimed for the core, the glowing violet sphere visible through the cracks in its ribs. I drove the star metal home. The scream that followed was not digital. It was the sound of 1,000 souls being torn from a machine. The Primarch erupted in a supernova of white pressure, the shockwave blowing out the palace windows and throwing me against the Emperor's throne. Silence returned to the Palatine. The organic wires in the walls withered and turned to black ash. The Emperor slumped forward in his bonds, dead long before I had entered the room, his eyes replaced by empty, glowing sockets. I stood up, the silence of the room pressing against my ears. I walked to the balcony looking out over the eternal city. The sun was beginning to rise, a pale, honest gold touching the roofs of the Forum. Below, in the streets, I could hear the sounds of a city waking up. The carts, the shouts of the vendors, the life of 1,000,000 people who had no idea that their world had almost been replaced in the dark. I looked at my gladius. The star metal was dull, its light gone. I was covered in sapphire blood and gray ash, a ghost in a palace of shadows. There would be no medals for this. There would be no triumph. To the world, the Emperor had died of a sudden fever, and the Praetorian Guard had been reorganized. I sheathed my broken blade. My hand was shaking but the air was clean. The ozone was gone. The smell of the city, dust, sweat, and history returned. The marble was cold again. The hill was silent. Rome was mine for one more day. I walked out of the palace, my heavy boots echoing in the empty halls. I didn't look at the bodies. I didn't look at the gold. I walked down the Palatine Hill toward the barracks, a lone centurion in a world that had forgotten how to breathe. The sun climbed higher, and for a moment the eagle on my chest felt lighter. The city breathes. The shadows retreat. The iron remains. The light of the morning washes the blood from the mosaics, and the history of the stars is buried beneath the weight of the stone. I vanish into the crowds of the Forum, a shadow among the living, while the Palatine keeps its secrets close. The Empire is a corpse, perhaps, but it is our corpse. And as long as the iron is sharp, the ghost will find no throne in Rome. The hill is silent. The dawn is here. The world is whole.